Welcome into Shot and Vipp, a podcast brought to you by Inside Carolina this college football season. I'm Taylor Vippolis. He's Jeff Schoettmer, a couple of Carolina football lettermen cutting it up on a weekly basis. Before we get to this podcast today, I have to mention Inside Carolina, we've moved our website. We're all part of the new staff. It's the same staff, the same standard, new home on On3 Network. You'll need to create a new account and get a new subscription to join the site at InsideCarolina.com. And you could join now for $1. It's a great deal, great content, great people. Shot, I want to bring our audience in the trust tree here because I consider everybody that listens to this a member of our extended family. There were some doubts on if this podcast would continue because at points last year, you could have played the same podcast for every loss. It felt like a copy and paste. And the team and the morale kind of beat us down. But we're back. We're back for another year.
We're back. December 11th, 2024 changed our lives. It changed Carolina football's lives. It changed Carolina, the school itself. I remember us talking about this when we first mentioned, there was rumblings about Bill Belichick potentially getting hired. And I told you, I think off record, I don't think it was recorded because I'm glad it wasn't recorded. Said, Vipp, you have a better chance of becoming the head coach at UNC than Bill Belichick. So I just want to put that out there that I had no faith that we would get it done, nor did I think he would even be interested. But fast forward the clock, 9 months later, 10 months later, and here we are. We're strapping it up in a few days, and Bill Belichick is leading us out of Keenan Football Center, and it's going to be a fun atmosphere.
There was a lot of talks with the Bill Belichick signing and coming to Chapel Hill, and then there was also the attention that it brought, and then the rumors start to go out about his buyout and NFL teams lurking, or maybe that he was just going to want to get out. But we are now almost a week away from kickoff, or we're less than a week away from kickoff. Bill Belichick is coaching North Carolina. I agree with you, it does feel surreal. And you're seeing the Bill Belichick effect when he takes over a program like North Carolina, where this time last year, not that many people are talking about North Carolina. This time this year, outside of maybe the teams in the top 10, the team that everybody wants to see right now is North Carolina because of Bill Belichick and the Bill Belichick effect. Carolina is getting a show on Hulu. That's following the football team around. They are getting the standalone Monday Night Football game to open the season against TCU. A lot of things that don't happen without Bill Belichick. How have you kind of seen the hype and the Bill Belichick effect kind of take place in Chapel Hill?
Well, I'm all over Twitter, and December was a wild time once Bill got hired. I mean, North Carolina is all over, Barstool Twitter, ESPN Twitter, just everyone is tweeting about North Carolina football, which wouldn't have been the case because we had a unsuccessful, unproductive season. And, you turn on a random Jets Colts game in late December. That's a 1:00 start, and the announcers and the color commentators are talking about UNC football and Bill Belichick in the third quarter because there's nothing else to talk about. That's the reach that Bill gets. You turn on ESPN First Take or, Get Up with Mike, Monday morning in March, and they're talking about UNC football. And that's something we haven't had in a long time, maybe if ever. So obviously there's a lot of hype that comes with it. But honestly, now looking back, I couldn't think of a better person to lead our program into this new venture that we're stepping into. He's obviously, college football, as everyone knows, is trending towards the NFL with contract negotiations and free agency essentially. And there's not a better person in the world, I guess, to handle that than Bill. He's won Super Bowls as head coach, and he was a Super Bowl winning GM. He did both when he was with the Patriots. So he's been there, done that. And, for me, it's been cool to see Bill's kind of personality come out. I think all of us, me and you included, the listeners, everyone in the world that wasn't a New England Patriot fan, our kind of observation of Bill was, him being short to the media, not giving much information, doesn't really have a personality, but a unbelievable mastermind football coach, program builder, team builder. But now we're kind of seeing him come out of his shell a little bit, which is cool to see. And I didn't know he had that side of him. Obviously, we know how good he is schematically and situationally in the football game. So I'm super excited to, obviously have the positive, interactions with UNC football and the national media before we even played a game. Every offseason, all the talking heads need something to talk about. But, when we're at the forefront of conversations after having a sub 500 season the year before, that's good for our university, good for our football program, good for everyone involved.
You played at such a high level at North Carolina at linebacker, one of the best linebackers in the ACC for your last couple of seasons in Chapel Hill. And you also spent time with NFL organizations and seen the inner workings of what makes an NFL team click. What kind of challenges do you think Bill Belichick has as he's making the transition from NFL to college that maybe some people aren't thinking about and maybe could be, places to look at and see, like, how does he adjust to this?
Before I talk about that, I actually had an interaction with Bill. So the year I'm, signing with the New Orleans Saints, and we do a joint practice up in New England. Teams go up there for 3 days and practice against one another, and then, you play a preseason game. So the first preseason game I ever played in was in Foxborough. And, we fly in 2 days prior. So I have 2 days of practice. Sean Payton's leading the Saints, my team, and, Bill's coaching. It's Bill, Tom Brady, Gronk, Edelman, all those guys. So I had a firsthand experience of a Bill Belichick practice when I'm, on the Saints. And it was the most impressive thing of all time. And at that point, I'm trying to make the team. I'm not thinking like a coach at that point, but just it hit me because during this joint practice, him and Sean Payton obviously kind of planned out the practice, but normally the team hosting is the one running it. So we essentially were running a Bill Belichick practice. And, this was August 7th of 2016, very early in the season, before the first preseason game. And we went over every situation essentially that comes up in a football game. And you hear the stories about Bill, always has his team prepared for anything that comes up. Kickoff after a safety, 2-point plays, into the game when you have to defend the sideline because the opposing team doesn't have a timeout, but they're not close enough to kick a field goal and they're trying to advance the ball. The Hail Mary, simple things like getting out of bounds in the two-minute drill, staying in bounds in the 4-minute drill. It was insane. We spent a whole practice on situations that arise in a game. And, looking back on it, I'm like, this is what we needed at North Carolina, not just a jolt boost from recruiting and talent development standpoint. But we need a coach that's going to get our team to critically execute when these moments come up in every game. Football, if you boil it down to, there's, each individual play is a situation, kickoff obviously to start the game. And then the first play of an offensive drive, like coaches have their philosophy, and then how you counter on defense, 2nd and long versus 2nd and short, 3rd and short backed up versus 3rd and long. And Bill is a mastermind at every situation, not just special teams, defensively. And I'm sure he's in the offensive coach's ears on things that they need to practice that they're going to see, whether it's game 1, game 7, ACC championship, or the college football playoff. He is a mastermind of practicing stuff that may not come up, every game, but they're going to have practiced it and it's going to show up eventually in a game and they're going to be prepared for it. That was a long-winded answer. I wanted to get that out there that I've, how impressed I was because I've, been a part of Butch Davis practices, Everett Withers practices, Larry Fedora, Mac Brown. I've seen multiple coaches run at Sean Payton, but Bill Belichick's, the way he organizes practice and puts players in situations that do come up in the game. We're not just running plays to run plays in practice. We are working situations all the time. So, my 2-day practice with him and then, seeing him across the sideline of the game, that was a, pretty surreal thing. And now he's leading our football team. So I know how, coached up and ready to go these guys are.
Yeah, if you're looking at this from a glass half full perspective, which I think before the team starts, the Carolina fan should be looking at it from that glass half full perspective. And that glass half full perspective is the fact that you have one of the greatest minds coaching your football team. And this has been a team the past couple of years where you're saying their shortcomings are what happens on Saturday. They're getting out schemed, they're getting out coached. Bill Belichick's not going up against, the Andy Reids, the Nick Siriannis. He's going up against, NC State, Duke, Virginia's, these teams that are pretty comparable to North Carolina. But if you look at the talent level that North Carolina is recruiting at, it's higher than the NC States. It should be higher than the Dukes. So if Carolina comes in with that inherent talent advantage, having that coaching advantage kind of puts them over the top. And then you could start to get into the conversations that I think most Carolina fans would love for Carolina to be. Chase down the Miamis, chase down the Clemsons, show year in and year out that you can be this perennial threat in the ACC. And to do that, you need a coach that can win on Saturdays. And Bill Belichick theoretically should be a coach that could win on Saturdays because he's proven he can win on Sundays. And it's going to be interesting when you're looking at this North Carolina team. One of my favorite parts right now to the lead up to the season is if you ask anybody how they feel about this team, the consensus is like, we have no idea because of how much turnover this team has. You have 42 transfers in, 41 transfers out. You're bringing in, 20 plus kids in your high school recruiting class. It's the eighth best transfer portal class, according to On3. When you're looking at how North Carolina is building their team through the transfer portal this offseason, what are you seeing? What's kind of standing out to you?
I mean, it's so tough to project nowadays. It's tough when you aren't at practice every day and you can't see the players develop and what transfers are, actually worth a damn, and who, what high school recruits are ready to play. But, it's even harder now. Like you said, the roster turnover, people are leaving after spring, transferring in the summer, transferring in second semester of summer. There's still the team camaraderie aspect of, players got to learn each other's names, learn each other's habits, and then obviously mesh on the field with our defensive calls, offensive schemes, special teams, the coaches, the relationships with them. I mean, there's just so much that goes into it. So honestly, this is a hard podcast to prepare for in terms of like, we don't know what the product's going to be until they roll the ball out on Monday night, because I don't think anyone really knows. All these national broadcasters, they aren't at practice every day. They can just kind of guess and hope. We have a quarterback that's coming in from South Alabama who's had 12 career starts. Obviously, South Alabama is a little lower level than the ACC, but we pick up some guys from Holy Cross, from UConn. Granted, on paper, it's a lower level style of football, but who knows how they can project? I have faith that, listen to Mike Lombardi talk. I mean, he can sell ice to an Eskimo. He's a slick, Northeastern. He's got a way with words. Him saying, countless infinity times this offseason of how he's going to build the team from inside out. And, that's music to every North Carolina fans' ears, be strong in the middle and be able to run the ball, play balanced offensive attack with aggressive style defense. I mean, that's what we've wanted for years. So it's a huge question mark of who's going to show up. I do feel confident in our quarterback, Gio. I mean, he's got a little bit of that Diego Pavia to him, in stature, quick release, use the word gritty. He kind of was overlooked in high school, had some injuries, and doesn't have a ton of offers, but now he gets his chance to play big time football. I actually put on some game tape of him the other night just to see what he's like, and I think he's going to be a strength for our offense. I actually do have more questions about our offense than our defense. Starting with the play caller, in my opinion. I'll just call a spade a spade. I mean, Freddie Kitchens, I don't know the last time he's called plays other than the bowl game at UConn. He was the head coach, obviously, of the Cleveland Browns. and I looked up who his OC was, and it was Todd Monken, who's now a top 3 or 4 OC in the league with the Baltimore Ravens. And I don't think Freddie was calling the game. I think Todd was. So, he's bounced around as a position coach and an analyst. So I'm interested to see, that dynamic. I have faith that, he'll get it done, but that's kind of my biggest question mark going into the season is, the offensive play caller and then the skill positions. I think the quarterback will be strong. Our quarterback room is deeper than it has been. Max Johnson's probably the backup, and he has tons of game experience, played in the SEC, played for us last year before his injury. And then you get a talented, true freshman in Bryce Baker, who's enrolled in the spring. So he's banked a bunch of reps. But that's my quick take, on the offense. I kind of bounced around there, but I do have faith in Gio to, protect the ball, to use his legs, play to his strength. So I feel good about it.
If you're a quarterback that's 6 feet or under, you have to be gritty, right?
Absolutely. I want my quarterback's got to be gritty if he's 6'8".
It's like the like white stereotype athletes where it's like, hardworking, last guy in,
Coach's
first guy,
kid.
yeah, the coach's kid.
Lunch pail. Yeah.
Anytime you see that short quarterback, your mind just immediately goes to gritty. But yeah, I'm gonna go strength and then a weakness, or I don't really want to call it a weakness until the team is out there.
Question mark, maybe.
Question mark, yeah. So for my strength, talking to people, I think North Carolina really likes what they have in their running back room. When you talk to people around the program, one of the first people that they're going to mention from this training camp has been the running back transfer from Michigan, Ben Hall. I think North Carolina really likes what they got with him. It's hard to, when you're trying to find tape from these transfers, most of these guys are transferring because they didn't get that great of a look at their other schools. So you're evaluating 20 something carries for the season when somebody like Ben Hall. But from all reports, North Carolina coaches love what Ben Hall, and then I think it's like a running back by committee. If Caleb Hood could stay healthy, that's been something we've been saying for 3-4 years now at this point.
4 years.
Yeah. So it's like, and
I was on staff when we were recruiting Caleb Hood, and that felt like an eternity ago. So,
and the reports about Caleb Hood this offseason have been he's slimmed down, going to try to play at a lighter weight and see how that does for his recovery and being able to handle the toll that comes with being a college running back. And then, of course, Davian Goss, who I think ended the season trending with momentum. When you see somebody like Omar and Hampton need a break or need a spell, him come in and be a positive in that running back room. And then I think this is kind of the year Jordan Shipp takes that next step and makes that jump as a number one receiver. You're looking at where Carolina is at in the receiving room, and it's a lot of question marks. They don't really bring back a ton of production. It's like Kobe Paysor and Chris Culliver that's about as productive you're going to get. Jordan Shipp enters last training camp. Adam Smith did a good report on Inside Carolina, or a good feature on Jordan Shipp, where he's kind of talking about how a third degree AC joint sprain slowed him down last year, and now he is healthy. Where I don't think he was fully healthy last year until the end of last year.
Yeah.
And that's something that's going to slow somebody down who's a true freshman. But I was at Providence Day. I was coaching basketball when Jordan Shipp played football. Mm-hmm. And this was I'm almost positive this was going into his junior year. And he was ranked like the 70th best receiver in the country. I believe he was a 3-star at the time. And UNC still hadn't offered. And I'm watching this kid during the summer workouts. And I called Phil Longo and I was like, dude, I don't care what the rankings say. Like, this kid was born to play football.
Yeah.
And I think when you're watching Shipp and you're doing the evaluation of him from a measurable standpoint and like the combine standpoint, nothing's really going to jump out to you. Like, he's not the fastest. He's not going to, jump out of the gym. But then when you put the pads on and you put him between those lines, he is a joy to watch
He's a
play football.
dog.
He's a dog. He's a dog.
Yeah.
Where it's like you watch him play and you're like, if you find me 11 of those kids, we're gonna find a lot of ways to win. So I think this is the year for Ship to kind of take that number one spot. And this has been a position where the transfer portal has kind of affected this team, where you're looking at, Isaiah Johnson, Nathan Leacock, Adrian Wilson. There's a lot of guys that North Carolina is bringing in. And right now, it just feels like, throwing darts on the board and seeing what sticks.
I don't really know any of those guys. And that's what I'm saying. Like, with so much roster turnover, we're not going to know the product until we turn on the game or go to the game Monday night. But the other thing I'll say about Jordan Ship is, so ACC Media Days is obviously very telling on who the coaches think is going to be, a really good player or a great leader. And for Jordan Ship to represent UNC as one of the four selected, for ACC Media Days as a true sophomore, that tells you something what the coaching staff thinks about him. They're not just going to throw out, Jordan Ship because he was a high recruit and he's from Charlotte, North Carolina. They saw something in him in the spring and the summer to send him, because there's plenty of guys they could have sent, Austin Blasky, who's, I think a fifth-year returning starter, has played a lot of football, but they chose Gio and they chose Ship. So that says something right there.
And then I'm glad you mentioned Austin Blasky, because that's going to kind of lead right into my biggest question mark for this team, and it's going to be the offensive line. Now, Lombardi has said they're going to build the team from the inside out, and by numbers and by volume, you could see they've invested a lot with the offensive line. They're bringing in almost an entirely new unit. And for me, that question is, how fast can that unit mesh together? And you're bringing in people from the G5 level. You mentioned you're bringing in somebody from Holy Cross. And then when you factor all that stuff in, unquestionably, to me, Blasky's North Carolina's best offensive lineman. And then when you get reports at a training camp that he broke his foot and now his target return date is Clemson, North Carolina has a manageable schedule to get you to there. But I don't think Clemson is going to be that game where you want to debut somebody and be like, hey, welcome back. Here is the best defensive line in the country. The guys who are across from you are going to be going in the top 10 in the NFL draft. So for me, there's a lot of questions around that offensive line.
I agree with that. Aiden Banfield, I think, is also a really good returning player. He was a true freshman last year who played majority of the snaps. Him getting another year of weight development, strength development, I think he's going to be an all-ACC player, whether it's this year or, in his future. Another thing I want to throw out about our offense is I do think we're finally going to see more personnel groupings that we haven't seen in the past. Little football 101. Longo, back in the day, he specialized in 10 and 11 personnel. There wasn't many big bodies on the field. Just the reports that I've heard, I think we're going to throw out, 12 personnel, 21 personnel, 20 personnel. All those are different than what we're used to seeing. And those are more NFL style, personnel groupings. And for your report on the running backs, putting two running backs in the game is, don't take, if a guy's talented and we got two good ones, don't take them off the field or find a way to utilize both at the same time. So I do have confidence that, Freddie will use some of his NFL background and use more, personnel groupings. And so we're not just rolling out the same, 11 guys or 5 skill positions every play, down in and down out. So that's what I'm excited to see on Monday night.
Quick break so I can remind everybody about our friends over at Johnny T-Shirt. If you're going to the game and you're going to be in Chapel Hill, you could visit Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. And if not, no worries. You can go online to johnnytshirt.com. They have everything that the Carolina football fan could want. The hats, the T-shirts, the jerseys, you name it. They've got it. Great people, great customer service. I'm on their website right now, Shot. They have the throwback football jerseys. Always look good. A bunch of Carolina football, a Jordan Brand apparel. They've got the Bill Belichick cut sleeve look if you want to. Shot, I was actually thinking about this, and I meant to text J-Bone. And Johnny T-shirt just reminded me, if I could get the scoop of what Bill Belichick is wearing for the first game, it would do numbers on Twitter.
What do you think he's going to wear? Cut off hoodie?
Cut. I think you have to go cut off hoodie. I think you just have to.
Yeah, I think cut off hoodie. And then towards the end of his career, he did the crew neck kind of, and he cut a little V right here. He cut the collar a little bit. So whatever he's wearing, it's not going to be a clean cut. He's not going to look like Coach Fedora or Coach Brown. He's going to have his own style, and I'm excited to see it.
And everything that I'm sure he's going to be wearing, you could get at Johnny T-shirt. So stop on by if you're going to be in town, or as I mentioned before, go online to johnnytshirt.com. Support the people that support us. Switching sides to the defense now. Same format. What are you kind of thinking with this defense when it comes to strengths and questions that you have for them?
Yeah, so I'll give you my general overview. Number one, I think it pays dividends to finally have a defensive-minded head coach. And Bill cut his teeth as a defensive assistant. Granted, he has coached every position on the field, but he's made his money as a defensive-minded coach. His son, Steve, I think an underrated thing about him is obviously he was with Bill for 10 plus years in New England, but he was the DC at Washington last year. So he has this is his second year of college football. It's not like we're just throwing him into the wild and he hasn't seen, some of the trickery that college offenses, are throwing out nowadays with, obviously he's adjusted to the different hashes in college, the formation into the boundary stuff, the motions, kind of the trends that are coming in college football. So I think that's a huge bonus for us. And just an overview of the defense, defensive line, I think this is going to be, and I hate to use the word gritty, but it's a gritty bunch that's not going to be flashy. I don't think we have a guy on the edge that's going to get us 10 plus sacks. I think it's going to be sacks by committee on the D line. I think they're going to be taught to eat up blocks and let the back seven run free. And, those are kind of our playmakers. We don't have a lot of flash and glitz and glamour. We don't have a Colin Simmons from Texas who's going to be a first rounder at the end who's, penciled in for 14 sacks on the year. So I think it's going to be sacks by committee on the D line, and no huge standouts, but I think they'll play with great technique, great pad leverage, great leverage, and, get the job done that way. And then moving off the ball to linebacker, I was super excited to see, obviously we lost, Power Eccles, who's with the Bears, and then we lost, I forget the linebacker transferred to Penn State, who I thought was a really good player. But we bring in Andrew Simpson, who started at Boise State for the last couple of years, and he's logged a ton of college snaps. He's not the biggest, strongest, fastest guy, but he's been there, done that. He knows how to run a defense. He knows how to, make the checks, make the calls. He's had a lot of production, got his hands on the ball, obviously made a ton of tackles. And that's what you love to see is kind of your captain play caller on the defensive side. And then to pair that with him, we got, the house kid from Washington who is super athletic, flashy, a little bit undersized, and, a true playmaker. He can blitz him, drop him into coverage, run sideline to sideline. So I think those two are a good pair. I think it's kind of like the Power Eccles, Cedric Gray, the Jeremiah Gemmel, Chaz Surratt, where you have one field general and one, uber athlete at the will position. So I'm super excited about that room. And then the DB room, I think it's going to be the best one in years. I think first of all, they're going to be very well coached. You got another Belichick coach in the secondary. So anytime a Belichick's coaching your position group, or I feel good about it. The apple don't fall far from the tree. And, if your last name is Belichick, you grew up understanding defensive football. So, obviously the Dixon kid, the corner, he's going to be a draftable kid next year. Marcus Allen's played a lot of football for us. Caleb Koss started all last year. He got beat down a little bit and, thrown under the bus at times, but he's an athletic kid and was a young kid last year that logged a bunch of snaps. So Will Hardy has played a bunch of football. He's finally healthy. Again, he gets invited to ACC media days by the coaches. So that tells you everything you need to know about that kid. And then I'm intrigued by this Gavin Gibson kid from ECU, another secondary member that I think is going to start and play a lot of football. And so that gives you 5 legit DBs. In the past we've had maybe 1 or 2 and then some holes at the other 2, but I think that's a legit starting back five in the ACC with two really good linebackers. And then like I mentioned, kind of a D line that's just gonna, eat up blocks and kind of do their 111 and play their role. So again, going back to personnel groupings, I think we're going to roll out a bunch of different personnel groupings on defense as well. That was kind of Belichick's MO in the NFL was, whatever offense they were playing, he was going to tailor his defensive scheme to what the offensive strengths were. So if we're facing a run heavy multiple tight end personnel unit, then he's going to play big bodies and go big on big and not play strength on strength. And if we're playing a 10 personnel team, he may implement 6 DBs. He is going to substitute every down. I think we're going to see more defensive substitutions than we ever have. I think it's going to be a lot of, man coverage. I mean, there's only so many defensive schemes you can run. It's rinse and repeat with all defenses in America. But I think that the way that they teach the game in terms of fundamentals, and you hear them talk about it, you listen to Bill in the mic'd up that Carolina football put out. He's going to each position group, and whether it's the running back, the punt return unit, the linebackers, he knows every position on the field. So I think he and the rest of the staff will coach them up better than they ever have. And to say coaching doesn't matter in college football nowadays, it matters more than ever, because with so much roster turnover and, there's always a place for good coaching. I think we're going to see a well-coached football team.
Yeah, I think you hit on it with where I think this North Carolina team really likes where they're at, where it comes to this defense, is their two outside corners, Marcus Allen, Thaddeus Dixon. I think North Carolina believes that these two can be as good, if not better, than any cornerback duo in the conference that they'll see this season. And I think when you could build a defense out that way and start to trust some guys to be on islands, it opens up what you could do defensively for the rest of their defense, where you could put those guys, set it and forget it, and kind of let everybody else do their own thing out there. I think without question, the biggest concern for the defense, it's going to be the defensive line. Just how many bodies they've brought in, who can kind of crack that rotation. They bring in DeAndre Robinson from Florida. They bring in CJ Mims from ECU, Smith Vilbert from Penn State, Bryce Yates from Connecticut. So they're replacing an entire front seven from last year. But you could also make the argument Carolina's front seven last year, how good was some of that continuity when, James Madison is scoring touchdowns on them left and right, to where maybe this defense did need a hockey line change in for this. And one thing I'm interested to see when it comes to North Carolina's first game against TCU is the secondary outside of the corners, because I think you almost have to assume that Caleb Cost is the front runner to win that nickel spot. But one player that Jason Staples has been really high on this preseason has been Trey Miller, and Trey Miller's ability as a cover guy in that nickel position. And then it's like, what do you do with that safety position? You bring in Coleman Bryson from Minnesota, Gavin Gibson from ECU, Greg Smith from Florida. You have Will Hardy. You have Malcolm Ziegler, who was a highly rated guy in state, I believe, from North Carolina. And there's a lot of bodies, and it's going to be new face, new place for a lot of these people. But I do think it's interesting when North Carolina sends somebody like Jordan Shipp to ACC Media Day, when they send somebody to Will Hardy to ACC Media Day, when they're talking about guys like Leroy Jackson on the defensive line, nose tackle on the defensive line, somebody like Trey Miller at the nickelback position, where so many players came in. I think I said it before, like 41 players went out. I think every player that's still on this North Carolina team from last year is there intentionally, where Bill Belichick comes in this spring, or he comes in last winter evaluates where the roster's at. Hey, if you're not up to our standards, like hit the road, see it. Like
Yep.
we'll find somebody who we think can play the style of football that we want. So I think anybody that is still on this roster from last year, it's intentional, and there's a plan for how they could best utilize them and how they could see them playing in this Belichick system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the guys that he's kept on the roster and he's brought in, he specifically targets a role for that player, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, but most specifically defense. Whether the Coleman kid from Minnesota, who's a bigger safety, if we, roll him down in the box and he's, not playing in pass coverage much, or, we get a faster linebacker like House in space against smaller guys, I think we're going to have tons of, specific players, specific substitution for game situations. And they're going to find, let's say Caleb Cost is a better blitzer run defender and the Trey Miller kid is a better, third down man-to-man coverage nickel. I think we'll see early downs, nickel play, and then third down, maybe we bring in another guy whose skill set is designed to cover slot receivers. So I think they will get the most out of our talent. And I think part of good defensive coaching is having a plan for a player's strengths. And, specifically, at all levels, whether it's the D-line, the linebacker, or the secondary, corners kind of, you're in man most of the game anyway. But, if D-line, if we have a smaller, twitchy edge guy, he's not going to play on first and second down. He's going to play on third and long exclusively. So I'm interested to see kind of what their plan is for all these guys. And, finally, I hope we see multiple guys playing on defense instead of the same 12 or 13 for 90% of the game.
Now, we weren't on the Inside Carolina prediction show, so we're going to do a quick game-by-game wins, losses for the season. Shot, I think when you're doing the glass half full perspective, a lot of people have said, yeah, there's a lot of turnover, but when you're looking at this North Carolina schedule, on paper in August, it looks like it's an easy schedule, and obviously that's hard to predict. But then you watch Stanford, Hawaii, and you're like, okay, you know what? The schedule, Carolina might have got some breaks when they're playing. I think 5 of the 6 teams that were picked at the bottom of the ACC in the preseason poll are all on North Carolina's schedule. So for North Carolina, it is a situation where if they figure things out quickly, they can win. So Shot, starting September 1st, Monday Night Football, TCU coming to Chapel Hill, win-loss.
Win. I mean, it's set up to be one of the most electric nights in Carolina football history. You go back to the Connor Barth Miami game, you do the 2012 Geo game, the 2019 Miami game. Those three are 3 of the best atmospheres that I've ever seen, in Carolina football. And I expect Monday night to be that, sold out stadium, Bills' first game, the only game on national TV, against an opponent that's been in the national championship 2 years prior. I don't understand why we wouldn't have the most rowdy crowd of all time. You get all day to tailgate, they're opening up the quad. So I got it as a win.
Something we've been saying to do for ages.
Look, it takes power, and I think Bill's got a lot of power.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to pick TCU. I don't love the pick. Right now, I'm on FanDuel, and TCU is a -3.5 favorite at the time that we're recording this. And for me, when I'm looking at TCU, I think TCU has a lot less question marks, and they have one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 in Josh
player.
Hoover, who threw for almost 4,000 yards last season. So I think when you have as much turnover as this North Carolina team, and if we're being honest, I think a part of me did get scared watching that Stanford team, where it's like Stanford brings in this coach from the NFL. It's going to be like this learning curve to where, it's not just this video game where you have this this natural transition. And I do think you know it well down there. TCU has been recruiting pretty well in the state of Texas. They're always consistently one of the best Big 12 recruiting classes. So for me, it's like I need to see this team in action clicking before I would feel comfortable picking.
That's fair. No, I completely agree. But I think we find a way to get it done. I think it's going to be a field goal type game, come down to a last second field goal, or, win by 3 or potentially lose by 3. But I think it's going to be a one possession game. I'll speed this up a little bit. I think we're undefeated until Clemson. Just looking at the schedule, Charlotte, Richmond, UCF. Again,
Connor Harrell revenge game.
Yeah. I'd actually love to do a season prediction after the first game, because again, no one really knows who's going to play. But I do think we're 4-0 going into Clemson. And then, I'll just say this. I got the season over under for wins is 7.5. I think you hammer that just looking at our schedule. Cal, UVA, Syracuse. I do think we slip up at least one time in the year. I'm going to go with the end of the season record at 9-3 at worst. That's kind of what I'm looking at.
I believe I have 8-4. So
8-4.
I'm with you on taking the over on that, and it's mostly because I think North Carolina is going to have the coaching advantage in almost every game, if not every game, outside of maybe that Clemson game. And again, if their talent's equal and Carolina has the coaching advantage, I'm going to lean on North Carolina. The toughest games that I have on Carolina's schedule, obviously the TCU game, obviously the Clemson game, and then I'm looking at I honestly think the next toughest game after that is Duke.
Yeah, we'll see what this Tulane quarterback is.
Yeah. I think Duke is very high on Darian Mensah. And if you're looking at football is a lot more than just quarterbacks. But if you're going, quarterback, I think Duke would be higher on Darian Mensah right now than North Carolina would be on Gio Lopez, until you see Gio Lopez kind of make that jump up to the P5 level.
I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I'm with you going the over, and it's tough. It's tough when you're doing this schedule, because you're like, I'm thinking 8-4, you're thinking 9-3. A lot of these games are toss-ups, so it's like, even if you think North Carolina has like a 60-70% chance to win some of these games, the odds say if you keep picking games that are 70%, one of them eventually has to be a loss. So that is tricky, but 9-3, 8-4.
Yeah, 9-3 minimum. Potentially squeak a 10-2, but I'm going 9-3 as my safe pick.
I think a better way to look at it than just doing wins and losses is actually, how would you evaluate what a successful season looks like to you? And this will be the last questions before as we're wrapping it up.
I think the first thing is just objectively seeing a good product on the field. You don't have to know football at a very high level to watch a game and know if your team is, producing on offense, defense, or special teams, or, taking the next step. Are we getting better as the season's going on? Because that's a sign of a good team as well. The NFL is different because they play more games. So you see some teams like the Bengals who struggle early and then peak at the end of the season. But that to me shows a good team, because they are getting better, getting more continuity. So a successful season to me, I do want to put a win-loss stamp on it. I do want to say minimum. If it's less than 8 wins, I'm not real happy. But again, I just want to see a competitive product. I want to see a more physical product. I want to see a more sound product. I want, more passion. I want more technique. I want better tackling, fundamentals. I want, big plays on special teams, impact, game-changing plays, from that side of the ball that we've been lacking the last 5 to 7 years. So that's kind of how I judge it. I do think, we aren't Georgia, we aren't Ohio State, we aren't Bama. I don't think we can flip a roster overnight and become a 12-0 playoff team. I mean, look at Indiana though. They went to the playoffs after 1 year with a new head coach. But do I think our ceiling for this team is that? No, but I do think it's a potential to get double-digit wins, with a bowl win, and that's what success looks like to me. Is talent. Our quarterback developing as the year goes on, our line, pushing people around, our skill players, our unknown skill players stepping up on offense, making a name for themselves. And then again, defense. The strength of our team, in my opinion, is going to be the defense. So I want to see a top 40 defense. That would be a success to me. I think the offense will come, later in Bill's, tenure here. But I think defensively, I want to see a quick turnaround, and I want to see us a top 40 defense.
Yeah, I think you have to attach a win number to the success of the season. And I'm with you that 8 mark is what I would measure a successful season. And in part, it's because of how relatively easy the schedule does look. For me, how I would judge it, I'm with you that you want to see a good product. You want to see a team that's well coached. You don't want these games like the Virginias, like the Georgia Techs, like the James Madisons, where you come out one possession in and you're like, this team doesn't have it today. And not only do they not have it today, they're going to get embarrassed today. And as a result, the fans are getting embarrassed. The alumni are getting embarrassed. The lettermen are getting embarrassed. I think a successful season for this North Carolina team is one that you look at the product that's being put on the field, and the fans are proud, the lettermen are proud, the alumni is proud. Everybody that's associated with the program is proud. Maybe some of the guys they brought into the transfer portal don't pan out. When you bring in 40, the odds say more than likely some guys are not going to pan out. Some guys will pan out. And then just kind of seeing what North Carolina has in their recruiting, their scouting, their development in terms of the players that they did bring in, and how you build on that in terms of next year. And then I would also say a benchmark that I'm looking for this North Carolina team with Bill Belichick. I think if you're looking at the schedule, if you go 4-0 in November, it would be a massive win, where you're going Stanford at Wake Forest versus Duke at NC State. And this North Carolina team, at times under Mac Brown, it felt like a well-oiled machine. And then November comes and
Sputtered.
You're sputtering, your check engine light's on. One of those tires is so far down the road, and you're just waiting on the side of the road for AAA to come. So for me, I think seeing a team that's not only competitive in November, but winning in November and trending towards the right direction into your next season. Because if you're a team that's carrying this momentum's a hell of a thing in college football and college sports in general. With the transfer portal, maybe you have a hot November and you go to a bowl game and less people are opting out, less people are transferring out of your program, more people are wanting to be a part of what you're building, instead of ending the season and being like, what the hell happened? What went wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, because we haven't beat NC State. We lost to Duke last year. Wake Forest, we played close the last few times we played them. So that is, and it kind of piggybacks off my point in terms of I want to see my team get better as the season goes on. So if they aren't playing good football in November, then they haven't gotten better as the season goes on. And you mentioned, in the Mac Brown era of us, we never really won a game we weren't supposed to, but we lost a lot that we were supposed to win. And, you beat the teams that you should beat. And, if you lose a tough one to a good opponent, then so be it. But to lose by, multiple touchdowns, multiple scores to a, 17-point plus dog, that's not a good football team. So I don't want to see any of that. I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with certain things that we want to see from our program. I think the fan engagement, the excitement is back. But obviously we got to keep putting a good product on the field for, that to continue as the year goes on. So yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to be up in Chapel Hill Monday night. So if you're around, I'll be tailgating all day and
Drinks on shot, drinks on shot,
drinks on shot, baby. And, come say hello. And, I still can't believe, when Bill got hired, I couldn't believe it first couple months, but now I've seen so much of it, and I actually got to go at spring practice, the last game, and we had a dinner with Coach Belichick, some of the former Letterman, and he spoke to us, introduced the staff, and I couldn't be more complimentary of his demeanor, his willingness to talk to, players that he never coached. He wasn't associated with North Carolina in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. And he was, asking these former players about what they do now, how was their experience at North Carolina, what he can do to help them, tidbits, that they appreciated from North Carolina and that they drew from some of the coaches that coached them. So he's doing all the right things. And, that says a lot, because that's not even his strength. His strength is X's and O's, player development, scouting. So he's an A+ home run hire for me. The way he's kind of galvanized our community, he's gotten our board of trustees, our chancellor, our AD on board, our whole athletic department of, we're going to spend money, and this is how you run a big time football program. I mean, case in point of them opening up the quad. Mac Brown he was a great politician, and he wasn't able to get that done. That shows you the power that Bill has, and they believe in him. And when he says something, we're going to do everything we can to make sure he has it. So couldn't be more excited.
Chapel Hill is going to be absolutely buzzing on Monday, September 1st, 8 p.m. kickoff against TCU on ESPN. Shot's going to be in Chapel Hill. I'm trending towards yes. I'm making my way towards Chapel Hill. I think I'm just going to road trip it this weekend and just say, what?
This is going to be one of those nights. Where were you when Bill Belichick coached his first game at North Carolina? Yeah. So I think you got to be there.
But Shotman, appreciate it as always. Always great talking to you, and we will be back next week to break it all down. Appreciate everybody listening. We are Shotman. We are so back.
Hey, we are back, and I want to give one shout out to, I think it's our biggest fan, Brian Golson. Just want to give you a shout out. I'll see you Monday, and appreciate everyone's support. It's going to be a fun year. We were down at the end of last year. We're rejuvenated. It's go time, baby. It's football season.
If you see us in Chapel Hill, come say what's up. I love personally anybody who comes up and listens to sometimes I forget that people listen to this, we just record it and then we put it out, and then people will come up in Chapel Hill and be like, you know what? I love your guys' podcast, man. I'm like, you know what? That is pretty cool. That's
why we had to make a comeback tour. Give the people what they want. We appreciate everyone, and if you ever have requests or anything for us to add to the podcast, we're always open. So hopefully to run into some of you Monday night, and we'll shoot the shit and have a good night.